Toda. Thank you very much for the honor and the pleasure to give this talk in the Hebrew University. I also appreciate the permission to do it in English for the sake of those viewers worldwide who would like to follow this lecture on the YouTube. I am very pleased to see such a young audience, which means that I'm going to indulge in speculations which are going to be very speculative. I'm going to share with you some thoughts which are somewhat wild, some ideas and hypotheses that I've been entertaining during the last 20 years, both concerning the foundations of the physical world, quantum, time, and the nature of consciousness. Don't worry if there are some things which you find hard to follow. I find them hard to follow too after all those years. As you see, this is copyleft, which means that you can later download the presentation, do whatever you want, quote it, misquote it, whatever. It always gives me great pleasure. Because I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to share with you some speculations, may I say something about questions which are between philosophy and science. There are several questions which intrigue us for centuries, millennia. They intrigue us because they are extremely interesting, and yet they frustrate us because they evade solution for generations. And what most people do, they say, leave it to philosophers. Science usually takes more modest questions, questions about which you can answer empirically by observation or experiment, and don't bother about these questions in which philosophers say this and say that, and they never come to any resolution. I want to take exception with this attitude and remind you that at least concerning one question, which is one of the most profound in philosophy, there's been a twist in the 20th century. Generations of thinkers asked whether reality is there regardless of our knowledge, of our consciousness. Is the moon really there when nobody looks? Is she beautiful whether somebody looks at her or not? I believe Amos Oz once said, "At motzet chen be'enai," which means you find grace in my eyes, and then made the whole thing completely impossible to understand. But these are questions that philosophers asked, and opinions were divided, apparently without any way to resolve them. And then along came modern physics, relativity, quantum mechanics, and a group of very original thinkers which gave that question a twist. I don't know whether they resolved it, whether they resolved the question. Probably they did not. Probably they made it even worse. But what is so beautiful about theoretical physics is that in experiments, famous experiments, for example, the EPR experiment or the Schrödinger cat experiment, these are cases in which the question whether something exists independently of our knowledge may be answered empirically. The EPR experiment is an experiment which has been carried out numerous times. The State of Israel, not long ago, not far from this building, gave the Wolf Prize for some of the pioneers in this research. Schrödinger's cat, may I mention that Tony Leggett, who also received from Israel the Wolf Prize, is one of the people who is trying to turn it from a Gedanken experiment into a real experiment, and we may witness that too. Would that resolve the problem? Probably it will make it even worse, even more difficult, and opinions will be even more divided, but then we shall be talking science. So here is such a case in which people did not relegate questions just to philosophers, to metaphysicians, and said, let's try to study them in the tools of theoretical physics. Let's push reality, say a single particle, say a system which is completely isolated, and then we may be in the position to revisit these problems. So this is the hope that we may entertain. People for millennia are asking the question about conscious experience. Is there something to our subjective experience which goes beyond what cognitive science, neurosciences keep telling us, keep revealing to us every day about the working of this amazing thing called our brain? And then, of course, physicists are asking few of them, unfortunately, but the best of them are asking questions. Do we really understand what time is? Do we really understand what is space, what is time, what is space-time? Do we really understand why we feel time in such a unique way which seems not to be present in the equations of physics? There should also be a caveat when you are trying to do these things, especially when you are trying to do what I aspire to believe that these two riddles, which each of them is a huge headache in itself, are somehow connected and may find a common solution. Many of you probably know that intriguing collaboration between Carl Gustav Jung and Wolfgang Pauli. Here was a renowned psychiatrist and one of the founders of quantum mechanics. Nowadays we know that they've been a doctor and patient, and the relationship between them was, at least to my opinion, not too ethical. But they collaborated. They tried to bring the strong tools from psychology, from depth psychology and quantum mechanics in order to tell us something new about time, about synchronicity, telepathy, psychokinesis. That was a very ambitious endeavor. It didn't result in anything. I mean, it was a speculation and remained a speculation for most people, I would say, not very convincing. So here are two great minds, which I believe did not succeed very much. We have witnessed during the 90s another meeting of great minds when Roger Penrose, one of this generation's greatest mathematicians and physicists and cosmologists, who is interested in questions of consciousness and who wrote a book which I warmly recommend to everybody of you. I promise you that you will devour it from cover to cover. It's so easily, so fluently written, and although it's advanced physics, you can follow it because he's a great explainer. He had some thoughts about the nature of conscious experience, and one day he met this doctor, anesthesiologist, Hammeroff, and together they brought ideas from quantum mechanics and biology, cell biology or neurobiology, and they formed a hypothesis which was amazing. Unfortunately, I don't have the time in this talk to describe it, and there was a great, there were great hopes that here they are going together to break mystery. About 20 years passed since then, and we didn't see any breakthrough, when actually it differed from the previous model in that it was too detailed, and these were good scientists who made predictions, clear predictions, and when the predictions were tested in the laboratory, they didn't work very well. So here is another experiment, another attempt which did not succeed very well. So we should be aware of these caveats. And still, having this in mind, I'm going to present to you these two riddles, try to present or offer what I believe to be an original, some original thoughts or twists to these problems by myself or my group, my students, and then at the end ask whether they could somehow be related. So we are beginning with the first riddle, which is perhaps the oldest and most ancient and intriguing riddle of philosophy, and nowadays many scientists keep asking it. What's this thing about our mind, about our consciousness? There are no people here who remember the old professor who was actually the emblem of this university, who used to talk about the mind-body problem. וזה דבר שהתחבטו בו גדולי הפילוסופים בכל הדורות. ישעיהו ליבוביץ', rest in peace. So, but his book is available, and we are going to ask. We are going to follow him in asking something about this question. I'm going to present this problem through. Let's begin by saying something, what we call a scientific explanation. Science does not like qualities. Every time science sees a quality, something which is a statement which is qualitative, or things which differ qualitatively, it actually shows us that they differ quantitatively, that you can measure them, that you can give them numbers. If we think that red differs from blue, that it's qualitatively different, just look at the details and you will see that the difference is in quantitative. You can show it in equations. The same about chemicals, which we believe that have different tastes. Once again, the difference is quantitative. even what goes on in our brain, different emotions. These are similar neurons, just different spatial configuration, which again is treated by mathematics. This is the background. This huge success of reductionism of natural sciences, turning everything into quantities, which is the background for the utter failure of science to explain consciousness. And when I talk about consciousness, I'll talk about one unique aspect of consciousness, which I believe that once you encounter it, you will understand how difficult is the problem. I'm going to talk about those qualities which are irreducible, and therefore people call them qualia, just as we talk about quanta in physics. Here is a case in which a philosopher has placed a challenge which science to this day did not manage to surpass. Leibniz asked the following question, which may sound to you at the beginning very silly, but it's extremely profound. He said, I know that my feelings, my subjective experiences are somehow related to this brain, which is a physical object. Now, this object is small, but in principle, it could be as large as a windmill. Now, imagine that I go into a windmill and I see its inner mechanism. Then I can understand how this windmill is working, how you get the wind from one side, grain from another side, and then there are all these things which happen inside, and you get flour at the end. Suppose that our brain was as large as a windmill, and therefore we could go within its corridors and look at the machinery. Then we could look how the brain works when somebody is happy. And here's the problem. We would be able in that case to understand why that person is smiling, why they are laughing, why they are dancing, and so on. But unless we ever had the subjective experience of happiness, we would never know that he is happy. We would know that that person is in that physical state, that this is the process that they're undergoing. We may be capable of predicting exactly what they are going to do. That tells us absolutely nothing about their subjective experience. Now, we may laugh at Leibniz, who thought that the brain might be something as crude as a windmill. No, we can't laugh. Okay, we know today how neurons work, synapses, you know better than me, transmitters, what do you have in synapses? Axons, dendrites, and so on, fine. Suppose that you can see, that you can understand what goes on in your fellow person's brain when they are happy. Neuron to neuron, synapse to synapse, molecule to molecule. Does it tell you anything about the subjective experience of happiness? Zero. Very frustrating, but that's the truth. Let's look at it. Here I have two things. They differ in their color, and to the extent that I'm not colorblind, we agree what are these colors, and we name them similarly, right? Is there any way that you can roll out the possibility that ever since I was born and I was told in my native tongue, and then in Hebrew, and then in English now, that these are the colors, that this is what I see every Independence Day, or the strawberries that we just ate? Can you roll it out that my qualia are inverted? Try it in any language. Try it in any way of probing my brain. Can you roll that out? Worse than that, can you roll out that this is my world? I'm happy, I can be sad, I can cry, I can laugh. How do you know that I see any colors whatsoever? I can show you instruments whose capability of distinguishing between colors and hues and subhues is much greater than than that of myself. Would you ascribe any qualia, any subjective experience to these instruments? So we see each other laughing, crying, whatever. We believe that there is subjective experience there, but that is only a matter of belief. Science keeps telling us only about the process, and it can be as accurate as you want, to the point of being capable, perhaps, of predicting what that person is going to do to the minutest detail. Does it tell you anything about the subjective experience of that person, or whether they have any subjective experience? it remains a matter of belief. Now, why is that such a problem? I don't need Qualia when I study a simple process such as the collision of balls. These balls repel one another by the laws of mechanics. Do I need to invoke the quale of feeling pain from one ball and then running away from that? That would be silly. It would not only be silly, it would be just utterly wrong. The laws of physics are based on conservation of momentum, conservation of energy. Try to invoke anything which is not momentum or energy, and then you are violating the conservation laws, and you don't want to do that. These are among the most cherished laws of physical science, upon which chemistry is based, biology, neurosciences, and so on and so on. Here is a plant. That plant has not been hydrated for some days, so it's going to die. And I come home and I say, wow, I have to give it some water. And then you can see the turbo pressure within the leaves. It drinks. Come on, it doesn't drink anything. It's not really different from the dynamics of balls. It's only more complicated. You have mapal rikuzim. You have more salt inside, less salt outside. You have simple diffusion, which are just mechanical laws. The doctor is studying my reflex. I would do the same thing even if I'm unconscious. This is just a mechanism. It doesn't need any quale. But then, when Romeo tells Juliet that he adores her, could I just treat Romeo just as a molecule who can be explained only by the laws of mechanics without invoking what hopefully everybody among you has experienced, adoring somebody, loving somebody? And here is the paradox again. If the laws of mechanics completely explain the motions of billiard balls, plants, how plants drink water and so on, and our reflexes, the explanation of our behavior, our emotional behavior should be the same. It should be as if there are no qualia, as if there are no subjective experiences, which is really funny. If we were without subjective experience, just doing whatever we would do, we would be zombies, which would be just dead people, smiling, laughing, crying, but no real life there. And as far as science is concerned, that is all what matters. Input, output, and what happens in between. There is no room, apparently, for any subjective experience. Some people say, oh, come on, we are much more complex. It's the complexity which gives you the qualia, which gives you this subjective experience. Is it, really? This good person who contributed a lot to psychology and psychiatry, used to construct turtles, electric turtles. And his turtles used to be more and more clever and intelligent. One of the turtles that he devised used to recharge itself. It used to go freely in the room in Gray Walter's home, and then every time that the battery was going to be emptied, it knew how to go to the source, the electrical source, to recharge itself, and then go back to its walks. And then when guests came to Gray Walter's home, he used to do something which was really nasty. He used to put some obstacle to that turtle, such that the turtle had to bypass it, which it knew how to do. And then there was another obstacle, and it had to bypass it, and then again. But then it became weaker and weaker. And gradually it became so weak and so slow that you could not be sure whether it will have the capability, whether it would make it to the source and recharge itself. You can understand that the guests at Gray Walter's home were intelligent and reasonable people, right? Invariably, they used to scream at this point, oh, come on, Gray Walter, let the poor animal go to the battery. You see that it's going to die. So here is the question. At which level of the turtle's complexity would you file a lawsuit against him abusing the animal? What, if the turtle wags its tail every time it sees Gray Walter, or whenever it sees a female mechanical turtle, or what? And then again, what is fear? If the turtle is afraid that it's going to die. That molecule, I would not ascribe fear to the soap molecule, which is hydrophobic, the detergent molecule, which is afraid of water. Neither would I ascribe fear to that bacterium, which is photophobic, All you need to know is how the flagella work, the flagella which are exposed to light, they wiggle, and those which are not, do not. So you have the net motion against the light. So I wouldn't say that it's frightened. What about this guy, the moment you attack it? And of course, what about this case? So am I going to ascribe feeling to any inanimate thing, or deny, say that for me human beings are just material systems and their inner experience does not matter? This is the problem, and the problem is ancient. So generations of philosophers try to invoke all kinds of philosophies, materialism, idealism, and here are some of the isms. Materialism, which nowadays we call physicalism, says, look, it's only an illusion. All you have in the world is only matter. You have brain, which is a material object, and all that goes on there are physical processes. We are not going to invoke soul or whatever, anything which is spiritual. So it's just an illusion, some strange way of looking at things, and we shall correct that illusion, and we shall understand that actually love, hate are identical, totally identical to the brain processes. And of course, we know the alternative. That is the alternative with which our fathers and all religions and mysticism and all those belief systems which are so opposed to the scientific worldview hold, that there is something which is not matter. There is something, nowadays people will say consciousness, which is distinct somehow from matter. We don't know what it is. And that is the mysterious ingredient that make us human beings, which feel, make us, or the animals, if you will. And there is a variant of that interactionist dualism, which actually says, called interactionist dualism, which actually says there is something which interferes within our physical world, which means that conservation laws are sometimes violated, which is the last thing that any physicist is willing to even consider. And not surprisingly, all the isms which were suggested or devised during the last two 19th and 20th century try to avoid interactionist dualism. Some people say I am a dualist, but there is no interaction. There is something called consciousness, but it's passive, it's there, but it does not interact with matter. It is just there. And there was an even more clever ism, epiphenomenalism, which say that, well, when our brain undergoes some process, then it affects our consciousness, which is not identical with our brain, but we can never know about that because it's not reciprocal. So influences, causal effects go only from the brain to the consciousness, never vice versa. And there's been parallelism, which talked about two worlds which by some miracle somehow look as if they interact with one another, but they don't. That was an idea of Leibniz. And another ism, and so on and so on. Common to all these is that they share the same assumption. They claim that whether we have consciousness, even if there is something like called Qualia, and consciousness being the totality of Qualia, that is something which is completely passive. It never interferes in the physical world. It never does anything. We never do anything which is a consequence of those Qualia. That is, people say, I do believe that when you see red or blue, or when you hear a tone, or when you feel something tasty, some smell, and so on. So people say, to the extent that consciousness really differs from the brain, it is inessential. It doesn't do anything. So this is how we cannot be as silly as to claim that this is just some error in our perception, but we do not get into any trouble with the physical laws or with conservation laws. One of the founding fathers of Western science, of physical science, Descartes, was the only one who dared to say that he did not believe in that. He believed that there is something called soul. He was a devout Roman Catholic, and he believed that there is something called a soul which somehow interferes with our brain. And this is why we have freedom of thought, of action. This is why we have free choice, and so on and so on. And Descartes is the person whom people blame Every time that somebody is taking a viewpoint which is too mechanistic, which treats people as machines, they say, you are Cartesian because you believe that there are two worlds. Actually, we believe that there is only one. I should have placed one slide which shows that one of the Nobel laureates of neurophysiology in the 20th century, John Eccles, towards the end of his life, he was once again devout Christian, he wrote a book, How the Self Affects Its Brain. And then together with another collaboration, another physicist, he tried to show how somehow the laws of quantum mechanics enable the soul which comes from God into our brain to affect what we do. So then, of course, this is something which we feel very uncomfortable with. This is why we are doing science. We don't want something so mysterious to interfere in what we are doing, and this is why the majority of people would endorse these theories which do not deny that consciousness is something unique or mysterious, but they would deny it the capability of doing anything or interfering with what we do, and the premise would go like that. For everything that you see, imagine a rabbit running from a fox because it is afraid. Alice kisses Bob because she loves him. Mother caresses the baby because she cares for him. This is all very nice, but they would do just the same. We believe that they have qualia to the extent that we felt fear, love, caring for a baby. But we would do exactly the same thing has there been no qualia at all. Can you rule it out? I believe that we can't, and this is why most of the theories in philosophy of mind, and cognitive science would say if there is such a thing like consciousness, which is distinct from material processes, from the neural processes, it is completely inessential. You can ignore it. You can be aware that it's there, that it's mysterious, but you can ignore it. He was not afraid to say that, but then people do not follow him to this day. And then here I had the chance of being the killjoy some 20 years ago when I wrote a paper in which I claimed that there is one behavior which proves what I myself hate most, that is interactionist dualism. I said I believe that I have a proof for interactionist dualism. There is one thing that human beings do which cannot be explained by just neural processes, but which is that case in which what a person is doing is due to the fact that that person has something distinct from the brain which is called consciousness. So I became a reluctant dualist, and I hate dualism to this day, and I hate, just like everybody who, just as you would expect from everybody who studied physics, I hate interactionist dualism, and I'm an interactionist dualist, and I wrote that paper in which I said, here is an argument in favor of dualism. I'm simplifying that argument, but you're more than welcome to read the paper in the bibliography. And then I published it and I said, anybody is willing to refute it. And along came a very famous and brilliant philosopher, a bit friends, David Chalmers, who wrote that book in the Oxford University Press. And then he said, Elitzur argues that the fact that people are interested about their consciousness, write books about it, and so on, indicates that indeed consciousness is not passive, but that consciousness interferes with our brain processes, just contrary to what physics would expect. And then he said, but I've already argued that interactionist dualism is of little help in avoiding the problem of explanatory irrelevance, and this is all what I elicited from David Chalmers, which made me, of course, very angry. So then I wrote a paper and I said, let's see what is the alternative which Chalmers offers. Why do people write books about consciousness? Why do people do careers, get professorships, as Professor Chalmers has, and doing good career, a lot of money, by doing things about consciousness? I shall not blame you if you will suspect that I am now simplifying or oversimplifying Chalmers' position. Believe me, I don't. Here is his assertion. He says, I have consciousness, believe me. Of course, I wrote this book about consciousness. I would have written exactly the same book had I lacked consciousness altogether. Do you understand the logic? I'm writing a book about consciousness. But I write this book about consciousness not because I have consciousness. I write that book because the laws of physics, by the laws of physics, the laws of cognition and brain dynamics and so on. I should write a book about consciousness, but it has nothing to do with the fact that I have consciousness. But I do have consciousness. Believe me, I do. I find it ridiculous, and then I wrote the asymmetry proof, which I'm not going to bother you, but then I invoked, he was talking about a being called zombie, which is something which philosophers like very much. Imagine a person like ourselves. It is not the zombie that you see in horror movies, which have no emotions, which has that frozen face and so on. A zombie is somebody who is doing just what we do. It is a philosophical zombie or phenomenal zombie. They laugh, they cry, they make love, they do everything without the conscious experience, without that subjective experience, without these qualia. So Chalmers said, I can imagine a zombie like me who is writing the same book. And then I said, well, let's follow it. And I believe that during the years, my proof became as rigorous as a mathematical proof. I said, let's give that zombie a name. If David's name is Chalmers, let's call that zombie Charmless. And imagine that there is, and here is the theorem which I proposed, which I showed, and I believe that this is something original. There is a certain asymmetry between Chalmers and Charmless, which is why Charmless cannot invoke something called harmless, which in turn cannot invoke something called harmless, and so on, because there is an essential difference between them by the same principles that David Chalmers lays in his book. I was hoping that, once I do something that outrageous, I shall see a paper by Chalmers now showing how this Elitzur is wrong, and to this day there is a sublime silence from Australia, and I'm talking about a person whom I respect and appreciate and even like very much, but the fact that I never get any answer is something which is for you to think about. So, I believe, and that's my belief, and you're welcome to follow the stages, the various stages of this theorem. You can find them in the paper which I wrote within a book which I edited. I had to go to an editor which was sympathetic to my ideas, so it happened to be myself, but then that paper is now, you can find it on the web, and there are many other papers that was an edited book, and many other papers which are much better than mine, so, and then you can also find it in my website. So I'm going to close this issue. The burden of proof is on me, that my theorem is sound, that it is correct, that the argument that I am posing, which is troublesome for me, because it is an argument in favor of interactionist dualism, which is an argument which says that there is something wrong in the basic laws of physics. The burden of proof still lies on me, and I invite you to follow the details of the theorem to see whether it is sound or not, and I will be happy to hear your comments. That is the first problem. And whether I managed to add any twist to it, I hope that I convinced you that it is a fascinating problem, that it is not a coincidence that so many generations of philosophers and thinkers and scientists of all disciplines, from physics to neuroscience and psychology, keep wondering and brooding about it. Here is one problem, and now we go to the next. We are now talking about a problem in the foundations of physics about the nature of this mysterious thing called time, which we believe that is the most, that its most essential characteristic or attribute is that it moves, that it flows, that life goes on, that we grow old, that things change, and so on and so on. And here is, to our huge disappointment, we encounter the paradox known to everybody who is doing the foundations of physics. Physics denies any passage of time. You can understand why, even at the logical level. When I say time is running or time is moving, motion means being in one place at one time, another place at another time. How can time move if time is the parameter of every motion? Just ask yourself, what is the velocity of that motion of time? And then you will encounter ridiculous things. You may find yourself invoking some higher time order, some super time, and so on, which is going to run into infinities. The laws of physics, apparently, although time is a parameter within them, never say anything about time, about that passage of time. Here, physics tells us where is this guy who is jumping into the water, where he is going to be at any moment. Very easy, says physics. You want to know this guy's height? Well, give me his initial height, give me the gravitational constant, whether you're on Earth or Mars or whatever, give me the time, then do the calculation, and you're going to get the height of this guy, or where this cannonball is going to be. Do you see anything here which tells you that those moments in time come and vanish one after another? Again, what physics has to tell us about this passage of time is zero. Probably, as you will see, the majority of physicists say probably it's an illusion. So here is the common view. We believe that things come into the world, come into existence, and then vanish. There used to be a guy called Alexander the Great who do all kinds of atrocities, followed by Genghis Khan, who did even uglier things, followed by Napoleon, who caused so much bloodshed, and we don't know who is going to be the next idiot who is going to be in history. But we believe that these people were born, grew up, died, and were replaced by one another. Once again, logic and philosophy would tell you that that making this statement, that time moves, or that the now moves, is self-contradictory. You will never say, actually, that Jerusalem is more real than New York just because you are not in New York now, or that Jerusalem is more real than Tokyo. They all coexist along space. They all have the same degree of existence, not accessible to our senses. People say, this is how you should think about time. Relativity theory now asserts, and mathematicians earlier, Gauss and others believed, our universe has 4 dimensions, time being the 4th, and then Alexander, Genghis Khan, and Napoleon coexist together. They are still there, just as different continents or different parts of the universe coexist along space. This is how you should think about time. Things coexist along time. Let me go with you into one of the most provocative, one of the most intriguing, genius theories of physics ever, relativity. Let's begin with special relativity. Here is a paradox known to physics students in special relativity, which will enable you to understand why relativity theory freezes time. You all know that by special relativity, things which move contract. This is the Lorentz contraction. So here I have a rocket. Imagine that this rocket is moving at a velocity close to the speed of light. That means that it's going to be shorter than that tunnel. So then there should be a certain time in which it is completely hidden within that tunnel. But then special relativity says that different observers should have the same ground, have the same status when they describe things from their viewpoint. So I'm now going to describe that from the rocket's motion. If that rocket's motion, if that spacecraft motion is inertial, I can claim, if I am within that spacecraft, that I'm at rest, and it's the tunnel who comes towards me, which means that it's the tunnel which should contract, which means that at no point will the entire rocket be hidden within that tunnel. Here, apparently, special relativity contradicts itself. The contradiction vanishes once you understand that time does not move. All those events, that is, that front of the rocket emerging from here, or the rear of the rocket just entering here, you should consider them as coexisting a long time, just as different continents or different planets or different galaxies coexist along space. Whether your reference frame is moving to this direction, this is your simultaneity line. These two events are simultaneous, so you believe that it's the rocket, which is now the spacecraft, which is contracting. If you are under the rocket, this is what you are going to see, which then you believe that the rocket has never been hidden and it is the tunnel which has been contracted. You resolve this conflict just by assuming that there is no such a thing as a passage of time. Remember, physics should be a bit I know it sounds like difficult stuff, but in this case, trust me, you can understand special relativity just by accepting that simultaneity is relative. There are two events, and one guy says that this happened before that one, and another says that that one happened before this one. And if you accept that both of them are correct because they have different views, then you will get all the other strange results of special relativity, such as time dilation, clocks moving more slowly, things contracting, and E equals c squared. That amazing achievement of Einstein is just a direct consequence of special relativity, published few months or few weeks even after the publication of that small paper on special relativity. So here is the most revolutionary theory in physics about that amazing thing called time, and actually what it tells us that there is no such thing as time passage. There are 4 dimensions: length, height, 3 dimensions of space, and there is another dimension of time that for some reason you don't observe it as you should have observed it, just existing there, and you believe that time is passing. It is even more paradoxical than that. I should say that the block universe of time is the majority, the mainstream opinion among physicists, relativity theorists, special relativity, general relativity, cosmology, and so on. Physicists in this university, to the best of my knowledge, most of them adhere to this view. Let me give you an example. Einstein had a good friend, Michele Besso. They were about the same age, and Besso was a very good friend. I shall not go into the gossip about their relationship, which was a very moving one. And Besso was also a physicist, and he was the sounding board of Einstein's paper on special relativity. But during the years, he became a philosopher, and he began arguing with Einstein about the nature of time and said, Einstein, special relativity is beautiful, general relativity is even more beautiful, but there is something missing about it. Time is passing, there is a difference. I can take space, for example. I can choose to remain where I am. I can go forward, I can go backwards. I can't do anything like that in time. I seem to be fixed, I seem to be forced to move in time, or time is somehow moving with me. And Besso said, we need a better theory of physics. And he wrote letters to Einstein, and Einstein said, my dear Michele, it will not work. There is no irreversibility in the basic laws of physics. You have to accept the idea that the subjective time with its emphasis on the now has no objective meaning. Einstein said to a philosopher, Carnap, that he found this problem a matter of painful but inevitable resignation. So he was not happy with that, but he thought that this is the least of all the evils. Otherwise, you run into paradoxes. Well, a few years passed. Sorry, I should say that it looked as if a few years have passed, and something happened which, even if you do not believe that time passes, should make you think differently. Michele Besso died. And Einstein had 4 weeks to live after his friend, and he wrote a letter of condolence to the family, in which he said, Michele preceded me a little in leaving this world. It doesn't matter. This is not important. For those of us who are convinced physicists, he's still there. It's just the illusion. It's, the passage of time is an illusion, so there is nothing like death, and you shouldn't worry about that. Which actually, if you do what Einstein says, and this is a presentation of relativity theory, Einstein says, you think that you are 3-dimensional objects. No, you are 4-dimensional objects. Imagine such snakes in which you are slices, cuts. Imagine a cylinder going through this surface. So you have here a circle. So that circle is a slice of that cylinder. So all of you, which are 3-dimensional beings, are 4-dimensional beings in which you can see slices. So here is the word line of that 4-dimensional being. There was a baby, and then he became a man, and then he became a friend. Here are Besso and Einstein, and then they met, and then they quarreled, and then when they were old, they made up with one another, and then they died. And then the difference between Besso and Einstein is only 4 weeks. Come on, it's just that his word line is a bit shorter, but he didn't die. Einstein didn't die. The whole thing of death is just an illusion. There is not much I can say against this view, block universe, which is the majority view, only that I don't believe any of it. I think it's silly. There is no experiment today that you can do to distinguish between these two problems, which is why most physicists would relegate this problem to philosophy too. But then I suggest, let's go to another theory. Einstein was the father of relativity theory, which he loved dearly, but he was also the reluctant father of quantum mechanics, for which he received the Nobel Prize, and he didn't want to go, and he sent somebody else to take the money because he hated quantum mechanics and he hoped to see it abolished. You know, he had this kind of strange emotions about his offsprings. And it is quantum mechanics which brought some of the most amazing paradoxes which Einstein hated. Some of them Einstein invented in order to show that quantum mechanics was wrong, and then after his death, it turned out that those paradoxes that he devised, once you do the experiment, they just do what he believed that cannot be done, proving quantum mechanics being correct. So here is the case which I mentioned at the beginning. Quantum mechanics, through the experiments like the EPR experiment or Schrödinger cat, is a theory which enables you to see whether those basic elements of reality under very extreme conditions really do the crazy things that quantum mechanics obliges them to do. Let me present to you just the paradox of the EPR. Imagine that I have two coins, say 1 shekel and 10 agorot, and then I shake them and I don't know what I have in each hand, and then they go very far apart. Then I open one hand and you see that there is 1 shekel in one of them. So you assume that there are 10 agorot here, and there is nothing magical about that. If, however, quantum mechanics is correct, and things do not have properties of their own before you observe them, or before there was any measurement or any interaction, then you have a very strange view. There is one coin going this way and one coin going that way. Each coin is a superposition of both being 1 shekel and 10 agorot. Okay? They are in a superposition. It's only at the moment of measuring them that you know what is in one hand. And then immediately, if it's your observation that forces it to assume one of the two values, then the observation in that hand should force the other coin to assume the opposite value in the other hand, which goes against relativity theory by implying that things go faster than light. When Einstein devised it, Bohr, his friend, was so depressed because he found that such a terrible paradox. What do you know? People carried that experiment, and it turned out that just what Einstein abhorred is what happens in reality. When you measure two quantum objects which are very far from one another, it's the measurement of one object which somehow, in a very mysterious way, forces the other object which is entangled with it to assume the other position, which implies that modern physics has two such amazing, such profound theories, relativity theory and quantum mechanics, but they can't be both of them correct. Here is a paradox published several years ago by me and a student of mine, the quantum liar paradox. We gave a twist to the EPR experiment in which the questions that we asked these two particles is not whether you are 1 shekel or 10 agorot, or whether, let's go physics now, whether you are spin up or spin down, which is what physicists do. We managed to make a measurement which was very profound, which was going to measure whether these two particles are going to do what EPR told them, what the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen experiment obliged them to do. That is, we managed to invoke a kind of measurement which asks one particle, are you entangled with your friend? That is there some relationship between you that any answer that you give me, your friend will give a consistent answer? And we managed to find a case in which the result of the measurement is that one particle says, no, I'm not entangled with that other particle. I'm not corroborating my views with that twin particle. Just imagine two criminals, two accomplices being interrogated by two policemen, and then you ask them one of them this question. And then along comes the other particle and says, that's right, he doesn't. We don't corroborate our versions. We called it the quantum liar paradox, and the paradox has been published in the literature. It has not been carried out yet. It's just a matter of technique, whether to carry it out, but we believe that once it is carried out, this is what the formalism says, we are going to get this paradox, which in some sense, with all modesty, we believe that it is even more acute than the known paradoxes like EPR or Schrödinger's cat, in that it not only tells you about a contradiction between quantum mechanics and relativity theory or Newtonian mechanics, but this is a case in which nature is contradicting herself. We are about to come to the end of this lecture, so let me tell you about how we explain that strange result of ours, and this brings us again to time. How is it possible that there will be an experiment in which nature is contradicting herself? That is, one particle tells you, I am not correlated with the other particle. The other particle, in all the cases in which that particle says I am not correlated, he says he's right, I'm not correlated, but just by saying that, it means that they are correlated. That was really baffling. There are several interpretations. I am not sure that the interpretation that we ourselves suggest to our result is the correct one. In other words, the paradox is there, and we believe that it is sound, and the physical community accepts it as a genuine paradox. But we went one step further and tried to explain it as follows. And in order to explain it, let me take you to another dark corner of history. If you read the old Soviet encyclopedia, Bolshoya Sovietskaya Encyclopedia, you will find something really strange. There is an entry called the Bering Sea in that encyclopedia, which is very wide. It goes along several pages, and it keeps telling you about this strange passage between Asia and Alaska. Why did the Soviet encyclopedia at that time of Stalin give such a large entry to that desolate sea? Well, you have to go one edition earlier of that Bolshoya Sovietskaya Encyclopedia, and you will find this gentle guy with the spectacles, Lavrenti Beria, who used to kill several people. He was the head of whatever they had before the KGB, Cheka, and so on, murdered so many people. And once Stalin died, Khrushchev realized that that was his chance to save his homeland and liquidated him. Now he had a problem. All the volumes of the encyclopedia in the letter B contain a very big entry about that hero of the people. What do you do when you want people never to remember that there was any time such a guy? You just go to every house in the Soviet Union, ask for that volume of the encyclopedia. There is some little correction that we have to do, and when they get it back, the Bering Sea covers any memory of that gentleman. We suggest, is it possible that nature is doing something like that? Is it possible that at the quantum mechanical level, sometimes when you push nature to the corner, nature corrects herself. Sometimes there is something inconsistent, then she will tell you a story which is not really convincing, which may explain such results like the liar paradox or some other results obtained by my mentor, Yakir Aharonov, during the last few years. Whether that speculation is correct or not, I do not know. Here is the bibliography of some of the things that we did. So let me summarize and say, I do believe that there is something very strange about our consciousness, and very likely it is not something that you can just leave as a matter of philosophical brooding without ever it having any bearing on scientific research. On the contrary, I do believe that if you keep asking these philosophical questions and try to look for ways to give them a twist, sooner or later they will do the same passage that we saw in the 20th century of questions from philosophy or metaphysics getting a physical twist. So I do believe that this is the case with consciousness. I do believe that quantum mechanics, modern quantum mechanics, is showing us something similar about time. And then, are the two problems related? I made a speculation about one problem. I made a speculation about the other problem. And my higher speculation is indeed that they are related. Let us give tribute to this great man. Henri Bergson was a great philosopher. He had interesting views, dissenting views about several issues in science. He wrote, your cognitive seminar, he wrote a beautiful book about laughter, Le Rire, which was translated into Hebrew, Hatzchok, and I would recommend you read it. It's one of the best books in cognitive psychology that you can think about. It gives you a very profound explanation as to why we laugh. So he had very profound ideas, but he was overshadowed. Shortly after him, Freud wrote his book about jokes and humor, and then the psychoanalytic view somehow made people forget Bergson's ideas about laughter, about the comic. He had views about life, which ran quite differently from Darwin's evolutionary theory. And then he was forgotten too. It was a kind of vitalism that today is not popular within biology. And he had views about time. That was actually his lifelong obsession, and he wrote several books about time. He once met Einstein, and the two people appreciated one another, but the meeting between them did not fruit into a dialogue because apparently Bergson made few errors in the mathematics. So he believed that there is something in time which eludes, which is not present in relativity theory. And he was forgotten, and he was also martyred by the Nazis during the Second World War, being a Jewish. Many years later, the prince of quantum mechanics, Prince Louis-Victor de Broglie, made a tribute to that great man and said, yes, if you look at relativity theory, apparently, only apparently, it does not allow anything strange like the passage of time to enter into its equations. But look about quantum mechanics, look about all those paradoxes, and to some extent, de Broglie prophesied that a new physics based on quantum mechanics would enable ideas like that of Bergson about mind, about consciousness, about time, getting a better scientific ground. He said if Bergson could have studied the quantum theories in detail, and this is said during the 40s, it is much more correct and much more profound even today, bearing in mind the new experiments done today. He would have noted certainly with joy that in the image that they offer us of the evolution of the physical world, they show us that nature in all its occasions hesitating. This is the idea of superposition. This is the idea of a coin being both 1 shekel and 10 agorot, or a particle being both spin up and spin down, and really having this superposition until you observe them and then they randomly choosing it. I believe that Louis de Broglie sensed that actually the final say is with that of nature, the physical world, having still something mysterious about which physics knows very little, and it is that mysterious, profound thing which is the root of that mystery within us, that is conscious experience. I'd love to say that it's only an illusion and time is standing still, but you agree with me that time has passed, and to the extent that you are tired, I do believe that you have this subjective experience of being tired now and somewhat confused from all the things that I told you. Thank you very much for listening to me. הפיזיקה מתארת לך בדיוק כזה מדהים, איפה נמצאת האבן בכל רגע. היא נותנת לך משוואות שמאפשרות לך לנבא את מצבה של מערכת. בעוד דקה, בעוד שעה, בעוד שנה, בעוד 100 שנה. לפני דקה, לפני שעה. בדיוק מאוד גדול. אם אתה שולט בתנאי התחלה, אתה יודע את זה. והנה, אחרי שלמדת את כל זה, למדת שנים פיזיקה. מילה אחת אין בכל התיאור הזה, במשוואה הזאת, לגבי מה שכל ילד יודע. שהוא קודם כאן, ואחר כך כאן, ואחר כך כאן, ואחר כך כאן. זה לא קיים. הפיזיקה נותנת לך את כל המצב, כל הגרף. זמן, מקום, הנה הגרף. ואתה הולך למשוואה אחרי משוואה, ואתה רואה שהן עושות עם הזמן דבר נהדר, הן מחשבות אותו, הן יגידו לך, תבינו, כשנאס"א שולחת חללית לירח השלישי של צדק, אתה צריך לדעת איפה יהיה צדק, איפה יהיה הירח שלו, איפה יהיה כדור הארץ, מתי לצאת והכל. זה חישוב מדהים של תנאי ההתחלה, ואתה הולך עם הזמן. מילה אין בכל המשוואות האלה, זה שהזמן עובר. זה אחד. שניים, מישהו נותן לך הסבר על מה קורה כשאני ואתה רואים, אדום או כחול. הוא אומר, נוירון לנוירון, סינפסה לסינפסה. זה קורה לפה, זה נכנס לפה, לרשתית, עובר התלמוס, קורטקס, בלה בלה בלה, אתם יודעים יותר טוב ממני. טוב, איפה הצבע האדום? ראית שאתה לעולם לא יכול לדעת, אנחנו יכולים להכיר זה את זה. אתה יכול להיכנס למוח שלי עם ה-FMRI'ים הכי טובים שיהיו בעוד 100 שנה. אז שוב משהו הלך לאיבוד שם. עכשיו, התחלתי בהזהרה, יש בעברית אין מילה לזה. באנגלית אומרים analogy ו-disanalogy. יש אנלוגיות מטעות, אבל יש תחושה ששתי הבעיות הן דומות. ככל שהמדע מצליח יותר ונותן לך יותר פרטים, פתאום נדמה לך שמשהו נעלם. אז האם יכול להיות אנחנו אומרים, אנחנו לא מבינים את התודעה. ראינו חומר מתנהג ככה, וכשהוא נהיה מורכב ונהיה מוח של נמלה, עכבר, בן אדם, תלוי איפה אתה רוצה לשים, איפה אתה נותן תחושות. פתאום מופיעה התודעה. מה שאולי אפשר לחשוב עליו זה שהפלא הזה נמצא כבר בחומר, כבר בכל אטום, בכל דבר, זה מה שדברואי או מה שברגסון היה אומר. זה לגמרי מיסטי, אבל הוא יותר טוב לדעתי מכל האלטרנטיבות האחרות. אז זה איך אני רואה את הקשר בין... הייתי אומר ככה, הבעיות דומות, יש דמיון בין הבעיות, צורת הבעיה דומה, יכול להיות שזה רק מקרה, אבל לך תדע, אולי אלה שתי פנים של אותו מסתורין. היו מקרים במדע שבהם כשראית תופעה מסתורית אחת, זה לא עזר כמה שלמדת אותה, עד שעשית את זה יותר מסובך, והבאת עוד תופעה מסתורית וראית שהם מקבלים פתרון אחד. היו מקרים שהיה מזל כזה גדול, היו מקרים גם שלא. במשך השנים יש לי כל הזמן את התחושה הזאת, ששתי הבעיות הן דומות. לא יותר מאשר תחושה. בבקשה.
בהחריה הסובייקטיבית האנושית לא מתקיימות תופעות הקוונטיות של סופרפוזיציה וכו'. אז אנחנו גם בניסוי מעבדה נעשה ניסוי, הניסוי בעצם קריסה של המערכת, ואז אנחנו חווים את זה. אז האם לא יהיה נכון להגיד שהמודעות היא קשורה לאותה קריסה של פונקציית גב?
האמת היא שזו הייתה האכזבה הגדולה של המודל של פנברוז והמרוף. המוח שלנו הוא המקום שבו לא צריכות להיות סופרפוזיציות קוונטיות, הן צריכות להיעלם בתוך שנייה. הוא חם, הוא רטוב, הוא צפוף. אתה תראה סופרפוזיציה רק אם אתה לוקח חלקיק, מבודד אותו לגמרי, ואתה נותן לו לעבור דרך החור הימני והחור השמאלי, והוא עושה התהפכות. זה אתה יכול לראות רק בתנאים מאוד מבודדים. המוח זה המקום האחרון שאתה יכול לצפות. לא. ג'ון אקלס ניסה, יובל נאמן, זיכרונו לברכה, אמר לו, זה לא מתאים מבחינת הפיזיקה, אתה לא יכול לראות את זה שם. פנברוז והמרוף האמינו שכיוון שיש איזה מבנה בתוך הנוירונים, הם, איך קוראים לה, מיקרוטובולות, אז החישוב הראה ששם אלקטרון יכול להיות בסופרפוזיציה למשך די הרבה זמן. ואז זה יכול לגרום לנוירון להיות בכפל מצבים, ואז פנברוז, הוא עשה דבר, אני עשיתי לו עוול. פנברוז אמר, אני כמתמטיקאי מסתכל על התגליות המתמטיות הגדולות במקצוע שלי, ואני לא רואה איך הגאונים האלה הגיעו לתובנות האלה בדרך אלגוריתמית. יש לו טענה בתחום ה-artificial intelligence, שאי אפשר להגיע להבנות האלה בדרך אלגוריתמית, אלא זה צריך להיות משהו שרק מחשב קוונטי יכול לעשות. דבר שעוד אין לנו היום, אבל בתיאוריה הוא יכול לעבוד. אז מה פנברוז? אני מאמין שהמוח כנראה, בתוכו מתקיימים תנאים כאלה במקומות מאוד מבודדים, שבאמת הוא יכול לנצל אפקטים קוונטיים. ואז בהמרוף ואמר מהצד של הביולוגיה, זה באמת מתאים למבנה של הנוירונים. מכאן הייתה ההתרגשות הגדולה. אבל כנראה שזה לא עבד. אני לא ברור לי בדיוק מדוע המודל הזה שקע במהלך השנים. כנראה שא', הסופרפוזיציה הזאת לא מתקיימת מספיק זמן כמו שחשבו, וב', גם אם היא מתקיימת, הטבע לא מנצל אותה. אז הקשר, אתה תראה הרבה אנשים, ולמרבה הצער, אני אגיד את זה, סרטים כמו What the Bleep Do We Know, שזה אוסף של הבלים. אתה רואה שם כביכול פרופסורים מדברים על תורת הקוונטים, אומרים קוונטים, וברור לך שכמעט אף אחד מהם לא מבין מה זה קוונטים, והם עושים אנלוגיות מהסוג הפרוע שהוא לא מוצלח. חלק מהאנשים יגידו שזה גם מה שאני עושה, ואולי הם צודקים. אז אתה תשמע הרבה אנלוגיות בין תודעה לבין קוונטים שהן פשטניות מדי. הצמד הזה היה הכי קרוב לפריצת דרך, וגם זה לא ממש הצליח, אבל אולי מישהו פעם כן יצליח. אז לא נראה לי, בתשובה לשאלתך, אם יש אינטראקציות קוונטיות במוח, אם יש תהליכים קוונטיים במוח, הם בפרקי זמן קצרצרים של איזה אנזים, מולקולה או משהו, כמו בכל הגוף, ולא זה כנראה מה שמסביר את היצירתיות שלנו, את חופש הבחירה שלנו, אם יש לנו כזה, או את הפלא של הקואליה שלנו. כנראה שלא, אבל יכול להיות שכאן אני, בתוך כל ההרצאה הפרועה הזו, דווקא אני כאן השמרן מדי, ימים יגידו. כן, נראה. פשוט חיפשתי, ונשארתי עד היום מטריאליסט בנשמה. המאמר שלי נקרא Confession of a Reluctant Dualist. שום דבר בחינוך שלי או משהו, אדם שגדל בבית דתי ונהיה חילוני, אני לא חושב שיש שם משהו שיגרום לי לאהוב את הדואליזם. להפך, הייתי מאוד שמח אם הייתה תורה שאומרת, גם הפלא הזה של החוויה הסובייקטיבית, אפשר להסביר אותו, בסופו של דבר נסביר אותו. וחיפשתי. מה שמצאתי זה שכל התיאוריות שאומרות שהתודעה זהה לתהליכי המוח, חייבות לומר עוד דבר. שיש לנו איזו מיספרספציה, שיש לנו איזו ראייה לא נכונה של הקואליה, של הכחול ושל האדום, שבגללה אנחנו חושבים שהיא נפרדת מהתהליך של ראיית הכחול והאדום. כל תורה שהיא לא דואליסטית זו ההוכחה שלי, היא תורה של טעות. עכשיו, אני מחפש את הטעות הזו, וככל שחיפשתי אותה, ראיתי שזה יותר ויותר אבסורדי. ולכן הגעתי למסקנה שזה אחד המקרים שבהם דווקא התחושה של האדם ברחוב, שהוא לא מדען, אומרת לנו משהו נכון יותר על מה שקורה במוח שלנו, מאשר זה שחקר את התופעה כל השנים. אני אגיד לך אולי משהו שיעניין אתכם. חפשו מאמר ברשת שנקרא What Mary Didn't Know. מאמר מאוד מפורסם של פילוסוף אוסטרלי, שהוא אומר, מרי היא נוירופיזיולוגית שהיא יודעת יותר מכל אחד מאיתנו מה קורה במוח שלנו כשאנחנו רואים איזה צבע. היא חוקרת ראיית צבעים. יש רק בעיה, מרי היא עיוורת צבעים. ועכשיו, ויכוח שלהם בספרות הפילוסופית. האם יש משהו שאני, כאדם שלא יודע איך בנוי המוח שלו, יודע על הצבע האדום יותר מאשר מרי? אני משוכנע שכן. מעניין שג'קסון לפני כמה שנים כתב מאמר, אחרי 30 שנה או יותר שהוא כתב את המאמר, הוא ואמר, טעיתי. כנראה שמרי, גם אם היא עיוורת צבעים, היא יודעת על האדום והכחול כל מה שצריך לדעת, ואין שום דבר אחר. אני חושב שהוא טועה, אני חושב שהוא צדק אז. אז יש כמה מאמרים מעולים כאלה בספרות הפילוסופית, שמראים שהטענה של הפילוסופים מאפלטון ולייבניץ ואילך, היא נכונה, שהמדע מסביר את התהליך, אבל הסבר החוויה השאיר עדיין משהו לא מוסבר ומשהו מאוד מאוד מהותי. אם מישהו מכם פעם יפריך את הטענה שלי, בבקשה. תודה רבה לכם.